All right, it's time for Julio to move down the lineup, but who should replace him? We'll discuss that and more on today's Mailbag episode of the Locked On Mariners podcast. Colby, hit it.
You are Locked On Mariners, your daily Seattle Mariners podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Ahoy, sailors. It is Tuesday, May 9th, 2023. This is Trident Gonzalez and Colby Patno for the Locked On Mariners podcast. Thank you so much for making us your first listen. Subscribe, like, and turn on alerts if you're watching on YouTube, or subscribe and leave a 5-star review on your preferred podcast platform if you like what you hear. And if you're part of the crew and rock with us every single day, let us know in the comments below. And if you want to hear from us even more, please consider signing up for our Patreon by scanning the QR code that's right above my head. The link, as well as our social accounts, is also in the description of this episode. And this episode is our weekly mailbag. We're going to be answering your Mariners questions, but before that, a reminder: you can catch tonight's game between the Mariners and the Rangers on the Mariners hometown broadcast with SiriusXM via the SXM app. First question here comes from Cody, who asks, do you think it's time to move Julio down the order for a bit? Maybe move Jared Kelenic or JP Crawford to the leadoff spot? Seems like Julio is in way too many key situations, and he's just not getting it done right now. You would be correct in that assessment. He is not getting it done right now, and that has been very much put on display over the last couple of games, really since he hit that home run near the start of Sunday's game. It's been rough. It's been a rough watch. He struck out multiple times. He hit into an awful double play yesterday, and it really doesn't seem like he's necessarily like there's a mechanical issue or something like that. It's just he's making bad swing decisions. His whole plate approach right now is awful, truly, and that's being reflected in the numbers as well. Colby, Julio Rodriguez is 13 for his last 76. It's really bad. That's a 171 average during that time. This is a problem, and it's one that is really hurting the team right now. Again, in some really key situations, you had an opportunity there with the bases loaded, 1 out in last night's game to expand your lead, and instead he goes first pitch swinging and drives it right to Josh Young for an easy double play. So yeah, he needs to be moved down the lineup because he has not earned the right to get the most at bats out of anyone in this lineup. Do you agree with that statement? And if so, who do you think should take his spot for the time being? Because I think this is a temporary thing. Once he starts turning around, you want him back in that leadoff spot. But again, for the time being, while he's trying to figure it out, who do you think should take that role? And if you don't agree, why should we wait a little bit longer to see if Julio can figure it out?
No, it's probably time. I guess the one reason you should probably wait, if there was one, is that there's not an overwhelming number of options that make more sense than Julio, even a struggling Julio. But I think it's probably time because, like you mentioned, moving a guy off of his primary spot in the lineup is not a permanent thing. It never has to be a permanent thing. It can be a 1-game thing. It could be a 100-game thing. It doesn't really matter at the end of the day. But in the meantime, you have to protect the team in a way, and you have to give your team the best shot to win games. And you have to do that over the feelings of, an individual player. Julio is not bigger than the Seattle Mariners, right? So it's just one of those things. It seems like he is. And maybe some people out there think he is, but he's not. He's one of 26 guys, and you have to do what's best for the other 25. So Julio will get this figured out. I'm not worried about it long term. I'm really not worried about Julio. He's still going to have a really good season this year. This is just bad. I mean, it's straight up bad. There's really no way around it. Julio himself would tell you that. He's kind of floating between different game plans, like almost seemingly between every pitch. Sometimes he's overly aggressive. Sometimes he's way too cautious, and he's taking pitches down the pipe early in at bats. And then when guys get on base, he's typically overly aggressive and he swings at the first pitch he sees, and he's just a mess right now. So yeah, I think you do have to move him down. Again, there's not an overwhelming number of options right now. I think the easiest option would probably be JP Crawford. You put him in the leadoff spot, assuming he's healthy, which we don't know. Scratch from yesterday's game after he fouled the ball off on Sunday. Said he was going to be back today, but he said he was going to be back yesterday. So we'll see. We'll see how that goes. But I think JP is probably your best bet. And then honestly, right now, I don't think there's any reason to have Julio inside the top 4. It probably should go, assuming health, JP, Ty France, Cal Raleigh, Jared Kelenic, or you flip Raleigh and Kelenic. Probably hit Julio 5, I think is probably the best spot. Maybe 6 behind Gino even. You have to take some of the pressure off here, and you have to go to work and you have to do what's best for your team. And right now, the guy who's most likely to get on base for you is JP Crawford.
Right.
And that's the most important thing. And you have, Ty France hitting second, and he has started to turn it around. He is on a nice little roll right now. So I think those are your 2 best hitters at this moment. So they probably should be hitting 1 and 2, and probably in that order. I don't think you want Ty leading off. Wouldn't be the worst thing in the world, but there are some limitations that his speed present that would be troubling in a leadoff spot. But yeah, I think it's JP would probably be your best bet. And then, I think it's probably France, Raleigh, Kelenic, Gino, Julio, Pollock / Trammell, Wong / Caballero, or Teoscar, and then Wong / Caballero, like something like that. So yeah, I think Julio should probably be hitting probably no higher than 4th.
Mm-hmm.
But I think JP is probably the right answer.
Well, we got asked about JP from Teddy here. JP is approaching 150 plate appearances. Teddy starts this message off with, he continues by saying, if he continues getting on base at this rate that he has, do you see Scott start putting him first in the order, though he's been producing beautifully at the bottom of the order the last few weeks, so maybe that's more valuable. JP's ability to get on base would be incredibly valuable right now at the top of the Mariners order. Also, on top of that, he is producing with the bases loaded. It's 4 10 RBI, as opposed to what Julio's been doing with the bases loaded, which you saw last night. We just talked about that. So JP is just coming through right now with in some big moments and with guys in scoring position. And so keep that going. Go with the hot hand, right? Lineups can be fluid. Every single day you can have a different lineup. There's nothing that's restricting you from not doing that. So just play the hot hand and go by committee, really. Like, you don't even have to necessarily have JP hit leadoff every single day. But right now, I think that is your best option until proven otherwise, right? So yeah, go with JP. And I agree with you that Julio should probably be hitting somewhere in the middle of the order, in the middle third of the order, and at the back half of that as well, probably 5 or 6. So yeah, and to real quick address what you said about Ty France, though, like, I don't care about the speed element. I just want a good hitter hitting first in my lineup, guaranteed to have the most at bats in my lineup. In that situation with bases loaded, and 1 out, I know Ty France has hit into a hell of a lot of double plays, this season. Don't get me wrong, I'm totally not ignoring that fact, but right now I feel a lot more confident in his ability to get the double there or get a single there than Julio.
So the last 5 games carries more weight than the previous 15. Gotcha.
Well, because of also Ty France's track record in general, combined, that I believe that Ty France is closer to the hitter that he's been for most of his career rather than those 15 games.
Yeah, to me, that still is a better fit at number 2 than it is leadoff. Because if JP Crawford, to answer this question, is going to get on base at this rate, he's at 38%, 378 on base. Now, look, do I think he's going to continue to do that all year? No. He's running an 18% walk rate right now. That's really high. Doesn't mean I see a reason why it's going to immediately decline just from moving him up in the order. No. And I still want Ty France there to drive in runs. And if I have Wong or Caballero hitting 9 and I have JP hitting first, then I have more opportunities for Ty France to drive in runs. So
sure.
Yeah. Like if I'm shaking up the bottom of the order, then I still want guys in the middle. And I still right now, even though I would hit like Raleigh 3 or Kelenic 3, they're kind of working through their own stuff right now. Kelenic still looks okay. He's still hitting the ball hard. He's just, running in some outs here, and he's stringing together, a couple bad games here and there, but he still looks pretty good. So maybe Kelenic is the answer at leadoff, but honestly, I'm fine keeping Kelenic where he is. There are some creative ways the Mariners could go about this. And if they hit Ty France leadoff, I really don't care all that much. Fine, whatever. The important part, I think, is you move JP up right now. You kind of ride the hot hand. But to me, if you're going to move JP up from 7, it's got to be 1 or 2. I don't think hitting him 3, 4, 5 really makes a lot of sense.
No, not at all.
There's just not enough pop there.
No, he should be hitting leadoff. Like, again, I wasn't advocating for Ty to hit leadoff. I'm just saying if they did
exactly what you were doing.
If we got the lineup today, though, and Ty was hitting 1, I wouldn't have an issue with it because he runs like he's in wet cement.
Sure. They are facing a lefty today, so that might change things as well. Might not be a bad day to get Jared Kelenic a day off.
Yeah. We haven't seen AJ Pollock in a little while, so it'd be nice to see him. I believe, is it 2 consecutive lefties next 2 days? Oh, they didn't announce a starter. Yeah, they
haven't announced a starter for yesterday's game or for tomorrow's game. Yeah.
Yeah, it's Heaney tonight, and then we'll see about tomorrow. Is that the DeGrom spot?
I think so.
Gotcha. All right, so we got more questions coming up here in just a moment, but real quick, a reminder, this episode of Locked On Mariners is brought to you by FanDuel. Make a fast break to FanDuel during the NBA playoffs because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use, and you can bet on everything from the Celtics and Sixers to the Nuggets and Suns. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with a same-game parlay. So don't miss the chance to get your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/locked-on. That's FanDuel.com/LOCKEDON to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. And you're listening to the Locked On Mariners podcast. Thank you again for making us your first listen. And again, you can catch the Mariners and the Rangers on the Mariners hometown broadcast with Sirius XM via the SXM tonight if you're not able to watch or if you just prefer listening to the game. Sometimes I like doing that. So let's get back into these questions. This one comes from Nick. Do you think Scott Servais is hindering the team's ability to grow by not holding players more accountable when effort/play may dip? I assume that you're really asking about, like, why does Scott not bench anyone during games for mental mistakes? Because we don't know if he's holding guys accountable or not behind the scenes. None of us are in that clubhouse. So he very well may be doing that. He might be chewing guys out. I mean, that doesn't really seem like his character, but chewing guys out in his own Scott Servais dad way, But we really don't know if he's doing that, if he's handling things in a more disciplinary fashion behind the scenes. And maybe it's just, part of his philosophy that he feels that that's the better approach to doing things, doing it privately than some sort of public display of, taking a guy out of the game in the first, second, third inning. We talked about this with the Eugenio Suarez situation when Colby said Suarez should have been benched for getting picked off by Corbin Burns in that Milwaukee game, which I assume you stand by. But that's probably what Scott's philosophy ultimately is just to handle things more privately, if I had to guess. Because frankly, if he wasn't doing at least some of that, holding guys accountable in some sort of way, he probably wouldn't have a job right now in Seattle.
Yeah, as frustrating as it can be sometimes with Scott. I don't think Scott has tremendous feel for like in-game moments. I think he is a great communicator. I think he is a great adjudicator. I think he's a great team builder, which he's proven here in Seattle, and that includes his coaching staff. And when the analytics folks and his coaching staff come together and say, if we get into this situation, this is what we should do, I think he does it 100% of the time, which, isn't wrong per se, but I think sometimes there's some feel you have to have a feel for your team. You have to have a feel for your guys, and you have to understand that there are factors that just, they can't be explained, that pop up in the middle of a game. And you can't possibly have, prepared for every single scenario. And I don't think Scott's got great feel for that. I think he kind of panics sometimes when the plan doesn't get followed or he has to make a decision that might go against the plan. That's where I think Scott really fails. But when it comes to relationships, when it comes to building a clubhouse and all that stuff, you have to trust the guy. He's won 90 games in back-to-back years. He probably should have been manager of the year in back-to-back years. Players love to play for him. So I think this is really more about his philosophy of, you praise publicly, you condemn privately. And that's just kind of who Scott is. And it's probably unfair of me and others to expect Scott to radically change who he's been for the last 6 years. But it doesn't mean it's not frustrating at times to see Scott, because what it can look like is that Scott is just kind of like, whatever, not a big deal when they are big deals. Right. But we don't know what happens behind closed doors, and Scott's done really good things with this club, and including, weathering the Kyle Seager situation, the Kendall Graveman situation, obviously, keeping the team together during a pandemic when there was real issues in that clubhouse regarding certain policies and whatnot. So I think you just have to trust Scott when it comes to the team building aspect. But yeah, that doesn't mean he's a perfect manager. That doesn't mean he's without his warts. And like I said, I don't think he's great. I don't think he has a great feel for situations. I think sometimes it's a really stubborn, like, this is what we decided we're going to do, so we're going to do it no matter what. Sometimes there's just a feel thing that you have to have, and I don't think Scott's got that. But the other stuff he does really well, more than makes up for it. So yeah, I'm willing to live with some frustrating Scott nights, because I know overall the payoff is significantly better than if you have some, brilliant tactician who divides a clubhouse in half and allows that to fester. I'd rather have Scott's side of management than the opposite, essentially.
Next question here comes from Sage. Any updates on who you think is a good option for another arm to replace Robbie Ray this season? Is Lance Lynn still in the picture? Yeah, Lance Lynn, Lucas Giolito, Jack Flaherty, Jordan Montgomery. Just look at the teams that are currently struggling, right? And you really need to look at teams like the White Sox, the Cardinals, because teams like the A's and the Nationals don't really have anything to offer you on that front. But if you're a Mariners fan who thinks that this team is going to add at the deadline and add to its rotation at the deadline, then you need to continue rooting for teams like the White Sox and the Cardinals to be bad, because those are going to be your best opportunities to add a significant starter to this rotation this summer. So I would look at those few names that I mentioned. Colby, you have any others that you've looked at?
No, just Alex Wood. San Francisco is kind of an interesting team. I think right now you're more looking for teams that could fall off than specific players. But yeah, Lynn would still be an option. And again, this is assuming a couple things. A, that the Mariners are in fact buyers around deadline time. B, that these other teams that we're talking about are in fact sellers at the deadline. And also, what does the rotation look like? Is Marco a 4-win? Is Marco a 3.5 win guy? Is Bryce Miller a 3.5 win guy? Well, maybe you don't need a Lance Lynn. Maybe you can go get a more of a number 5 starter type and focus on the offense. So yeah, I think right now names are still a little early. I think we're about probably 5 or 6 weeks away from really starting to hone in on names, and in particular teams. I think by mid-June, most teams know in their heart of hearts, they really know if they're buying or selling. There's going to be more buyers than ever, fewer sellers, because there's more playoff spots up for grabs. But yeah, Lynn still makes sense. If the White Sox continue to struggle, Giolito, all those guys make a lot of sense. So yeah, just monitor over the next few weeks teams that might go on winning streaks or losing streaks, and just be wary of that. And I think by mid-June, we'll have a pretty good idea of who is a seller, who's a buyer. And that's when teams like Pittsburgh will know what Pittsburgh really is. We'll know what Baltimore really is, etc. So yeah.
Right. And, I think once we get to the summer, if this team is in a position to buy, it might need to make a decision on where to put most of its focus in terms of adding to this roster and adding impact to this roster, because I think you might have to pick one or the other between pitching and position players to add actual legitimate impact because of the state of your farm. Look, we're pretty high on where the farm is still, even after all the graduations, and plus they're going to be adding more talent to it through the draft this year in a massive way with those 3 essentially first round picks. But that sentiment might not be shared around the rest of the league, and so the interest level in your prospects and your assets might be a little down compared to some of the other contenders that you're going to be competing for these guys with. So are you going to be in a position where adding to your rotation makes the most sense, even if you do have a clear spot to upgrade there? Or does it make more sense to go out and get like 2 really good bats to add to this lineup, which right now is near the bottom of the American League in almost every category, right? And who knows if that actually continues. There's still so much baseball to be played. So those are questions that we're going to have to answer weeks and weeks and weeks down the road, because again, we don't even know if this team is going to be buying. But I do wonder if it gets to a point where, yeah, there is a need in the rotation, but the need offensively is greater and you can really only pick one. But we'll see. Maybe I'm wrong on that front. All right, more questions coming up here. This one comes from Chad. Does Bryce Miller's early success change the trade deadline for us? If he strings together a couple more quality starts, does our main priority switch back to acquiring a bat to start in the lineup? So, I mean, that kind of goes in line with what I was saying at the end there. But Colby, let's get your thoughts on this.
Yeah. I think Miller's success it's obviously something that could change how you approach the deadline. We've talked about this yesterday on our Patreon show, but it doesn't necessarily mean it does, because it's only been 2 starts. So if he does string together, I think he's probably going to have 15 starts between now and the deadline, maybe 12, something in that range, give or take.
Give or take, yeah.
Yeah, if he's 10, 11, 12 starts and looks like a really good number 4, number 3 pitcher, it might change the priority. Because here's the deal. While the Mariners can afford to do both, it doesn't make it smart to do both. It doesn't make it smart to go out and get a number 3 starter and go get the most expensive bat that's on the market, because you're not looking at this as a 1-year window thing. You're looking at this as a multiple year window. So would Miller stringing together starts, could that change the desire or the primary focus at the deadline? Yes, it could, especially if Marco is also pitching relatively well. I still think they're going to want to add a starter, but the quality of starter that they are willing to go after is probably going to be dictated by how well Bryce Miller throws. So it's kind of a lot of pressure on Bryce long term, but it is what it is. And right now, I think that if I had to make a choice and you could either prioritize offense or pitching, right now I'd probably still pick offense, but that could change really quick, because there are a lot of guys in this lineup who we expect to produce who are not right now. And if they all start to, then you might look at it and say, I mean, we could use a platoon bat or we could use a bench bat or 2, but like now we don't have to go get, Ian Happ.
Tim Anderson.
Yeah, like you don't have to go get the big bat. Now you just kind of need role players, and you can go get the number 3 starter instead. So kind of depends, but yes, there is a possibility that Miller throwing the ball well for the next month and a half will get the Mariners to kind of shift their focus back to adding bats at the deadline.
Yeah, for me, it's going to be interesting to see if they ever have a question of, is this actually a need in the rotation, or is it just a luxury to add another starter? Like, what is going to get you deeper into October? Because if you're going to have to pick one or the other, you are going to have to ask yourself that. What is more important here? Am I comfortable with Bryce Miller starting games in the postseason, or Marco Gonzalez starting games deep into the postseason? Or, am I fine? And then can I just transition most of my focus over to the offense? Right. So that's going to be a debate that we're going to have a lot over the course of the next couple of months here on the show. If this team, does get on a roll here, starts to turn things around, and does look like it's shaping up to be a buyer by the end of July. But again, a lot of baseball to be played. So until those questions really are answered, I don't have a solid answer for you. Next question here comes from Josh. How much, if at all, does Jose Caballero becoming a usable bench piece impact Dylan Moore's role on the team if/when he is healthy? And by the way, folks, we're dealing with a little bit of lag. So if you see a delay in responses or anything like that, that's why it keeps on giving us alerts over here. So, yeah, Dylan Moore, if he gets back, how does the presence of Caballero kind of change that, Colby? If at all, right?
I don't think it does, really.
Okay,
I think right now Caballero is a guy who's going to be on this roster. Like if Dylan Moore came back tomorrow, Sam Haggerty would be the guy they'd send down. They wouldn't even think twice about it because Caballero is actually producing. So I think the role for Dylan Moore is essentially, maybe the one change is that maybe they're more open to playing him in the outfield a little bit more. Because if you remember coming into this year, they were pretty dead set on like he's going to be a second baseman, shortstop, and occasionally third base. He will not play in the outfield as much as he did last year. So,
Right.
yeah, I don't think it really changes all that much. I think maybe what you see more games where JP Crawford's on the bench against a lefty because they've used Crawford a lot still, and that's one of the things we talked about. By having Dylan Moore focus only on shortstop and second base by just being an infielder, you could give JP Crawford 20, 30 days off, which he needs because traditionally Crawford has really, he's really faded as the season went on. He really isn't built to play 155 games. So I think maybe that's where you could see Caballero and Moore both, helping your team. But yeah, I don't think that Dylan Moore's role is going to be changed all that much if he gets back 100% healthy, which honestly right now is a pretty big if.
Again, I know I keep on saying this. I know it's a really boring answer, but there's still a lot of baseball left to be played. We don't know if Jose Caballero is going to be good by the time that Dylan Moore gets back, if Dylan Moore gets back, right? We don't know. I mean, so far it's been awesome to watch. He's a really fun watch right now, Jose Caballero. He seems to do something at, once every single game that he plays in. He's just a solid ball player, but how far can he take that, right? Because we saw Sam Haggerty have a really good, summer when they went on that win streak and everything, and then he started to tail off, and now we're, you see what Sam Haggerty looks like right now. Same thing could happen for Caballero, who again was a long-time minor leaguer. It took him a while to get to the major league level. And he just hasn't, he doesn't really have any like outstanding tools, right? But he's just a good, solid ball player. I just don't know how long that's going to last because just what his profile is, right?
Yeah, I have to say though, yesterday JP got scratched late, and the easy answer is, well, with JP dealing with his knee and Wong not in the original lineup, okay, Haggerty plays second base, Caballero plays shortstop, and they chose to go with a less than 100% Colton Wong, instead of Haggerty. If that's the case, Sam Haggerty should not be on this roster because you've essentially turned Haggerty into Tommy La Stella. If you're not going to use him in this specific situation, or you think you can't, then he shouldn't be on the roster because you went out there with a second baseman who was limited. And Wong actually had a pretty decent game. He didn't look, like he was suffering from any kind of injury, and maybe got a couple new ones after being hit on the shin a couple times. But, he was actually had good range at second, made a couple nice plays out there. So it didn't look like the wrist was bothering him, but still, he wasn't in the original lineup. Then they had to make a change, and they still wouldn't use Haggerty. They don't want to use Haggerty. He shouldn't be on this team. Period.
Right.
So I thought that was weird.
Yeah. No, I did find that very weird as well. And it just seems like this team really it wants to operate with just 12 offensive players rather than 13, but they have to have at least 13 because you can't have more than 13 pitchers on the roster. So
by the way, lefty on the mound today, if Haggerty's not in the lineup, like just further evidence, they do not trust him to they don't think he's a major leaguer if Haggerty's not in the lineup today. After what we saw tomorrow, there's no chance you can convince me that they'd look at Sam Haggerty and be like, yep, he's a major league quality player, even though we literally went with, 75% Colton Wong over him the day after we said Wong was going to be out 2 or 3 days, and we didn't have him in our original lineup for today.
So again, like Haggerty, Caballero does have the profile of a 4A guy, so, and even though he's been a lot of fun to watch, the last 2 weeks doesn't really change my mind about that. So I'm still, you still kind of have to be wary of, is he going to fall off at some point? Because there's nothing in that bat that's really, overwhelming to suggest that he's going to be able to sustain this kind of offensive production.
Right. Although, Dylan Moore was also a 4A guy.
It's true. So yeah, so it doesn't,
sometimes these guys pop and they carve out a role.
Yeah.
But most of the time what happens is they come up, they have a good, couple weeks or a month as the league kind of adjusts to them, and then they get overexposed, and then you end up with a hole again.
Yeah.
So maybe that's not Caballero. Maybe he's one of the guys who beats the odds, but if you're playing the odds, that's what he is.
Yeah. So that's a long-winded way of saying that let's just pump the brakes on like Caballero as a part of the long-term plan here. What do you do once Dylan Moore gets back and all this stuff? Or what do you do at the deadline because of Caballero? None of that really matters right now. We got to see if he can sustain this over the next, couple of months until we get to that point, really. And then we can have that discussion. But for now, let's just wait and see. Let's enjoy the ride with Jose Caballero because it's been a lot of fun to watch. But let's pump the brakes just a little bit. All right, last question of the day. Very quick one from Max here. I'm wondering what websites you guys use to get instant metrics from games. Like what sources did you use to get Bryce Miller's spin rate numbers right after his start? BaseballSavant. It's a Major League Baseball, like an official Major League Baseball website that's powered by Amazon Web Services. And they have all the tracking data from the ball clubs being filtered into that website live in real time. So every single pitch, every single batted ball, everything like that, all the data from that gets put into BaseballSavant like a minute or two after it happens on the field, if that. So, and that all gets collected on one game page that you can look at, and they also have individual pages for players, etc. So check that out if you haven't already. BaseballSavant.com. It's a really handy tool that Colby and I use a lot on this show for a lot of our discussions. I also use Fangraphs. Colby uses Baseball Reference a lot. Oh man, there goes the there goes the light. It's about
That's
time.
Probably a wrap it up sign.
It's about time that it finally happened during a show, during a Locked On episode. It's happened a couple times on our live stream, but never on Locked On. So there it was. At least it didn't crash and everything turned off. All right. Yeah, like you said, I think that's a pretty good sign with your lag issues and my set trying to fall apart and kill me live on this show. It's time for us to get the hell out of here. All right. That's going to do it for our show. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Locked On Mariners podcast. For Colby Patnode, I'm Trident Gonzalez. Be sure to give us a follow on Twitter at LO_Mariners. You can follow me at Dane Gonzalez, that's DANEGNZLZ, and Colby at CPAT11, that's CPAT11. Follow us on Instagram and TikTok as well over at Locked On Mariners. That's one word, Locked On Mariners. You can also find all that stuff in the description of this episode. And thank you again for making us your first listen. And another reminder here that you can catch tonight's Mariners-Rangers game on the Mariners hometown broadcast with SiriusXM via the SXM app, and you can catch us after the game tomorrow for a Locked On Mariners post-game show. But for now, have yourself a beautiful baseball day, and we'll see you tomorrow. Peace.